Hey guys, tonight we're going back, way back, to a time of powdered wigs, heavy gowns, and heads that, unfortunately, didn't always stay where they started. You've just slipped through the wooden gates of Tudor England. The air smells like baked bread, horse sweat, and a bit of treason. You're walking cautiously across cobbled courtyards, past guards in tights with halberds too large for casual comfort. You hear the distant chanting of monks, and the occasional scream of someone not having a great time in the dungeon. Your guide for this candlelit stroll is none other than Anne Boleyn. You've heard the name, probably. Second wife of Henry VIII, mother of Queen Elizabeth III, and owner of what must be the worst resume line in royal history. Executed for possibly flirting while being inconveniently intelligent. You're about to learn that being Anne Boleyn wasn't glamorous. It was dangerous, stressful, and full of moments where you think, maybe being a merchant's wife in Kent wouldn't have been so bad. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're still awake, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice about Henry VIII's court is that it's exhausting. The people smile too much. The tapestries are itchy. There's this constant buzzing tension, like someone might toss you in the river just for using the wrong fork. You're in the early 1500s, and the vibes are complicated. The king is still youngish, charmingish, and hasn't yet begun his slow descent into paranoid burger-hoarding villainy. Not yet. Anne isn't here yet, but you are. You're drifting through great halls lit by smoky torches where the whispers sound like Latin spells. Henry's married to Catherine of Aragon, a Spanish princess with impeccable poise and unfortunate luck in the childbirth department. The court is obsessed with heirs, particularly male ones, because girls just aren't crown material, unless you ask, well, basically all of Scandinavia. Anne will arrive soon, but first meet her sister Mary. She's already here, navigating court life with the grace of someone who's maybe just a little too enthusiastic about flirting. She catches the king's eye. Things happen. Historians still argue whether she was a willing companion, a pawn of her ambitious family, or just someone who liked horses and attention. Either way, Mary's short royal fling doesn't exactly earn her stability or respect. The Boleyns are climbing, though. They're not royal, not even close, but they're crafty, rich enough to buy velvet and know how to play chess with people. Anne's father, Thomas Boleyn, is a diplomatic type, fluent in French, fluent in ambition. He sends his daughters to the places where power lives and sometimes sleeps. Let's shift the candlelight onto Anne. You see her, barely a teenager, studying music, learning court etiquette, and memorising the precise number of curtsies required per hour. She's not stunning by Tudor standards, too thin. Dark eyes, olive skin, too much continental edge. The court likes its women pale and plump, like yeasty bread. But Anne? She has spark, something else. She talks back a little, listens closely, smiles like she knows things she shouldn't. Dangerous things. Back in Kent, her childhood home is surprisingly ordinary. Hever Castle isn't exactly Versailles. It's cosy, draughty, and smells faintly of damp stone and roasted pheasant. She grows up alongside a parade of siblings and cousins, all learning to bow and curtsy before they can spell their own names. Education is for boys, usually, but Anne learns anyway. French, Latin, needlework, chess. She probably rolls her eyes more than she should. One day, her father announces she's going to the Netherlands. You groan. She groans. But this is a strategic move. She's going to serve Margaret of Austria, a sharp-minded regent who runs her court like a school for high-functioning overachievers. Anne watches, listens, absorbs. She's like a sponge in silk slippers, and she realises power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it sips wine and waits for others to speak first. This is also the start of Anne's weird European tour. Over the next few years, she bounces between the Netherlands and France, adding languages, wit, and elegance to her growing arsenal of unsettling charm. She becomes someone who knows just how long to pause before responding, how to smile without promising anything. Dangerous again. At night, you curl up in one of those feather-stuffed canopied beds. Stuffed is generous. It's mostly goose and medieval regret. The sounds of the court filter through the heavy wooden shutters. Music, laughter, the occasional scream of a page dropping a platter. Sleep is no refuge, not when your every breath is monitored for treasonous undertones. Anne Boleyn is learning this too. The court is no fairy tale. It's a hedge maze with knives. You've got to walk light, speak less, and never trust anyone who pours your wine too eagerly. A few quirky details float around Anne's early years. Some say she had a sixth finger on one hand. Others say it was a small nail-like bump, nothing more. Historians still argue whether that infamous extra digit existed at all, or if it was invented later by people with agendas and a thirst for dramatics. Either way, Anne's physicality was often described as bewitching, and not always in the flattering Disney sorceress kind of way. Sleep comes in waves now. The flickering torchlight is soft. The court feels quieter, like it's waiting, and so are you. Anne Boleyn hasn't changed the world yet, but she's watching, she's listening, and soon, very soon, she's going to step onto the English stage, with a smirk, a plan, and enough spark to burn the whole palace down. You're standing in a narrow stone corridor now, soft moss creeping between the bricks, the air just cool enough to make your breath visible. Somewhere down the hall, a young girl is kneeling, lacing her boots. Awkwardly, like she hasn't quite figured out which loops go where. That's Anne. She's still just a kid, a girl from Kent with splinters in her fingers and ink smudges on her sleeves. The Boleyn family isn't royalty. They're what you'd call upwardly mobile, which in Tudor England is a fancy way of saying they're trying really, really hard not to be irrelevant. Anne's dad, Thomas, is a courtier and a diplomat. Her mum, Elizabeth Howard, has noble blood but not much patience for nonsense. Between them, Anne inherits both scheming and snark. You follow Anne through the winding passages of Hever Castle. It's quiet here. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your ears ring. Servants shuffle like ghosts. The furniture looks like it hasn't moved in centuries. But behind the stillness is a constant hum of preparation. Anne's being trained. Not just how to sew straight hems or dance without elbowing anyone in the face, but how to exist at court, which fork to use, when to speak, how to look demure without looking dull. And it's exhausting. For you, for her, for everyone watching with expectations sharp enough to cut bread. You're not alone in the corridor. Mary's there, older and already a little wilting from early exposure to royal radiation. She's been to court. She's seen how fast affection turns into exile. If Anne's watching, she doesn't say it. She just folds her hands and learns, always learning. By now, you know that childhood in noble Tudor England isn't all lace and lute music. It's a lot of nodding and kneeling, a lot of wearing uncomfortable clothes and pretending you like eels. Anne doesn't seem like the type to enjoy eels, but she eats them anyway. There are some whispers already. Anne's sharp. Too sharp. She remembers everything. She mimics accents. When tutors lecture, she interrupts, politely of course, with questions about things like political alliances and papal authority. You raise an eyebrow. She's 12. That's like a middle-aged scholar in Tudor girl years. You pause by the hearth in the main hall. Smoke curls up like a lazy snake. A tapestry hangs nearby. Faded hunting scenes, golden antlers, tiny embroidered eyes staring blankly into the void. Anne studies it, lips parted just slightly. She's memorising it for no reason, other than the fact that she can. Fringe detail time. Legend has it Anne had a mole on her neck. Or was it a beauty mark? Or a mark of the devil? Historians still argue whether this physical quirk was real, exaggerated, or entirely fabricated after her death to justify how things ended. Either way, it became one of the countless little ways people tried to label her: witch, temptress, outsider. As if having an opinion and a slightly unusual face automatically meant you were hexing livestock in your spare time. Anne's world is divided into two halves. Inside the castle, where she's being sculpted like a figurine made of manners, and outside where life continues with muddy boots and the occasional village fair. She doesn't get much of the latter. The Boleyns are investing everything in their daughter's future, which means polishing, pruning, and packing her off to somewhere more politically useful. And so it happens. You watch Thomas Boleyn arrange Anne's departure like someone shipping rare cargo. She's going to the Netherlands first, Margaret of Austria's court, a real upgrade. Think of it like being sent to finishing school, except it's full of multilingual diplomats and young nobles playing chess with actual consequences. Anne's nervous. You can feel it in the way she fingers the edge of her cloak. But she doesn't say anything. She never really does, not unless it matters. As you board the boat alongside her, the wind kicks up a spray of cold salt water. You shiver. She doesn't. She's already staring toward the shore she hasn't even reached yet. The trip is long, the sea is not your friend. Everything smells like fish and wet wool. But when you arrive, the shift is immediate. Margaret's court is intellectual, elegant. Nobody yells here, and the table manners are terrifyingly precise. Anne starts copying everything she sees: how to walk like you own the hallway, how to pretend you're not bored by political debates, how to respond to a compliment with a smile that says yes, and I know it, and then France. Oh boy, France. Anne's teenage years are shaped by the chic and scandalous environment of the French court under Queen Claude. Suddenly, you're surrounded by musicians, poets, women in towering headdresses, and enough perfume to kill a horse. Anne dives in like she was born for this. She learns timing, subtlety, and the art of surviving in a world where being noticed is both a compliment and a curse. She also learns that women here talk, they scheme, they flirt, they write poetry, they wield influence with a raised eyebrow, and Anne? She's taking notes like her life depends on it. It kind of does. The French court is where Anne really becomes Anne. She sharpens her intelligence. Her sarcasm gets dry enough to light fires. She becomes someone who can insult you in 3 languages while still looking interested in your haircut. It's a talent. There's a story that she once played the lute better than her tutors and refused to pretend otherwise. Another story claims she got into a debate about the Virgin Mary with a bishop and made him cry. Historians still argue whether these tales are fact, fiction, or the fever dreams of men who couldn't stand being outwitted by a woman who didn't apologise for existing. You spend your last night in France watching Anne watch other people. That's her secret weapon. Observation. Everyone else is performing, preening, posturing. Anne is storing every interaction like it's gold. She's planning something, even if she doesn't know it yet. And so are you. You feel it, the tension, the build-up, the slow burn of something coming. Anne Boleyn is no longer a girl from Kent. She's a woman of the world, fluent in French, skilled in music, dance, and debate, and far too dangerous to leave out of the story. You're on a boat again, but this time it's not full of cold fish smells and damp despair. Well, maybe just a little. The English Channel doesn't do anyone any favours. Anne is returning to England, and you're right there with her. The wind howling in your ears like a warning whispered by the gods of bad life choices. She's in her late teens now, armed with more polish than a chapel floor. She's seen France. She's seen diplomacy. She's seen women with real influence, even if it came in sequined, side-glancing, gossip-soaked packages. And now she's heading back to the place where ambition wears a plainer face but cuts just as deep. England, however, is not impressed. You step onto the muddy shore with Anne, skirts slightly lifted to avoid the wet mess, and it becomes immediately clear. Her European glow isn't what you'd call in style here. Her sleek French court mannerisms feel alien. Her fashion, tailored bodices, stylish sleeves, all that continental flair draws confused glances. You're not at Versailles anymore, darling. Here in the English court, things are more woolen. Anne returns to Hever for a short while. It's like slipping back into a too-tight shoe. Familiar, yes, but not quite right. The old castle seems smaller now. The walls whisper with old memories. Mary's still around, and you can almost hear the sigh she gives when Anne starts talking about Paris again. Mary has been through the meat grinder that is royal flirtation. She knows what happens to girls who rise too fast, but Anne isn't interested in being a cautionary tale. Not yet. Soon, she's placed in the household of Queen Catherine of Aragon, Henry VIII's first wife. That's right. Anne starts her English court career serving the very woman she'll eventually replace. You grimace, foreshadowing much. The English court is a different beast. It's like someone took all the pomp of France, removed the humour, and added a layer of icy formality. Anne adjusts. Slowly. She watches. She plays her part. She learns when to speak and when to let silence do the talking, and most importantly, she doesn't try to fit in. She makes the court come to her. You walk behind her as she moves through the great hall, head slightly tilted, mouth curled into the kind of smile that makes people wonder if they've just been insulted. She's charming, yes, but not in a way that puts people at ease. She's sharp, electric. You get the sense that standing too close might leave a mark. And here comes a twist. While Mary Boleyn had once caught the king's eye and been discarded like a half-eaten meat pie, Anne refuses to play that role. When Henry VIII starts sniffing around, Anne doesn't swoon. She steps back. She flirts just enough to keep him interested, but keeps her distance like a woman walking a tightrope over a shark tank. It drives Henry mad, naturally. But you? You're noticing something else? Anne isn't just playing hard to get. She's planning. She's calculating. She's seen what happens to women who give in too soon. She's not about to become a footnote like her sister. Quirky side note. Anne had a pet lapdog named Percoy, a tiny fluffball who reportedly fell to its death from a window while chasing a butterfly. Historians still argue whether this detail says more about Anne's sentimental side, or the fact that Tudor windows were absolute death traps for small animals. Anne's star begins to rise, slowly, painfully. Her fashion choices start influencing others. People whisper about her poise, her wit, her ability to make Henry laugh like no one else can. She becomes a topic of gossip and speculation, but no one can quite pin her down. And that's the point. She's reinventing the game. In a world where women are expected to be quiet, obedient and fertile, Anne Boleyn is unpredictable, witty, and, for the moment, unreachable. She's rewriting the manual in real time and everyone's scrambling to keep up. You trail behind her during court dances. Watch her glide across polished floors like a ship on calm waters. Henry watches too, a lot. And you know this isn't going to stay platonic much longer. The air crackles every time they're near each other. Servants whisper. Nobles roll their eyes. Catherine of Aragon, gracious and long-suffering, notices everything, but speaks of none of it. And then the love letters begin. You're there when Anne reads the first one. The parchment smells of ink and desperation. Henry pours out his heart in the most extra Tudor language imaginable. Lots of "my heart is thine," burning desire, and more flourishes than a calligrapher on Red Bull. Anne's face, utterly unreadable. You peek over her shoulder. It's cloying, slightly pitiful, endearing if you squint. But she doesn't respond. Not directly. Instead, she lets rumours do the talking. She's not his, yet. But maybe, someday. If the stars align and he does something drastic, like, say, divorce the Queen. Spoiler, he will. Anne keeps her suitors at bay. Yes, plural. Her refusal to go all in on Henry right away only makes her more attractive to others, which in turn makes the king even more obsessed. It's like watching a royal version of The Bachelor, but with more Latin prayers and occasional public executions. But you notice something quieter happening in the background. Anne is changing. Or rather, the court is changing her. She's growing more cautious. Her humour's still there, but it's sharper, more selective. She smiles less. She listens more. Every compliment she receives feels like a trap. Every friendship, a test. You realise Anne isn't just playing the game, she's surviving it, one careful move at a time. As you sit on a velvet bench at the edge of the ballroom, candlelight flickering across the stained glass windows, you watch Anne dance her way into history. Literally. The music plays, Henry watches, and somewhere in the corners of the palace, people are already plotting. Anne doesn't know yet how much her life is about to change, but she's ready. The candlelight is softer tonight, the music more restrained. You find yourself standing beside a tapestry, something vaguely biblical, probably Judgment Day again, while Anne Boleyn circles the room like a storm cloud wearing satin. Her smile flickers on and off like candlelight, always polite, rarely warm. You've seen her grow from curious girl to court-bred tactician, and now she's an enigma. You're in the court of Henry VIII, but the drama unfolding here would make Netflix blush. Anne has officially become the one who won't say yes, which somehow makes her even more fascinating to the king. She's clever, well-read, suspiciously fluent in French innuendo, and never seems impressed with anything he says. And this, it's driving Henry out of his wide-shouldered, gold-threaded mind. He's writing again. More letters, more elaborate metaphors. You peek over Anne's shoulder at one, and it's all "my heart bleeds," "your eyes are my son," and several aggressively overused versions of "thine." You imagine Anne stifling a yawn while her maidservant pretends not to read aloud the juiciest parts. But this is serious now. Henry isn't just flirting. He's fixating. He's starting to wonder if Anne could be more than a mistress. Maybe she could be a queen. One small problem. He already has one. Catherine of Aragon, Henry's wife of nearly 2 decades, is still hanging on. Gracious, regal, and heartbreakingly composed. You pass her in the chapel one morning. Her hands are clasped so tightly that her knuckles shine like bone. She prays often. You get the sense she's not praying for herself. Henry begins his campaign to annul the marriage, and suddenly you're knee-deep in Latin phrases, papal decrees, and the sound of bishops nervously clearing their throats. The problem? Catherine was married to Henry's brother before he died, and Henry's now arguing that this somehow makes their marriage cursed and invalid. Anne, meanwhile, claims nothing publicly, but she's always nearby, always watching. Historians still argue whether Anne pushed Henry into the annulment or simply refused to be anything less than a wife. Some say she believed she was chosen, others say she was calculating. If Henry wanted her, he'd have to prove it in the most ridiculous, kingdom-shaking way possible. Either way, here you are, front row to the slowest, most passive-aggressive breakup in history. The Pope, sitting far away in Rome, has zero interest in granting an annulment. He's politically tangled with Catherine's nephew, Holy Roman Emperor Charles V translation. The Pope would rather chew gravel than upset that guy. So the answer is no, over and over again, politely with lots of Latin. But Henry isn't used to being told no. You walk with him through his palace corridors. He's aging now, still broad, still commanding, but the charm is souring. Anne still holds his attention, but now it's tinged with frustration. He wants to marry her. He wants a son. He wants divine permission. He's not getting any of it. So naturally he starts breaking things. First, he fires his advisors. Wolsey is out, Thomas More gets uncomfortable, and new names like Thomas Cromwell start slithering in. Next, he challenges the authority of the Catholic Church itself, and you're just sitting there like, all this? Over Anne? Yes. All this? Over Anne. Quirky detour. Some records suggest Henry once gave Anne a jewelled brooch shaped like a ship in full sail, symbolising her voyage into his heart. Or maybe just his bedroom. Historians still argue whether this was romantic, deeply weird, or both. Probably both. You spend long hours watching the court unravel. Friends take sides. Noble families whisper. England is splitting. Not physically, but spiritually, politically, and emotionally. And Anne? She's still not queen. She's still technically no one. But she's got power now. Real power. She influences appointments, policies, even fashion. Ladies mimic her style, men compete for her smile, and her enemies multiply. Quietly, of course. Always quietly. One night, you watch Anne perform a dance at court. Elegant, restrained, sharp as a dagger. Her gown glitters, her hair is pinned in carefully controlled chaos, and her eyes scan the room like a hawk in velvet. Henry watches her like she's the sun, and you know this is not a crush. This is a conquest, one that's turned into a religion of its own. And slowly, the crown begins to shift. Henry starts laying legal groundwork for something unthinkable. A new church, one where he is in charge, one where he can grant his own annulment. You try to pretend this is normal. It is not normal. And all the while Anne waits. She's not meek about it. She drops hints, challenges him. Some say she once refused to sleep with him for over 6 years. That's practically medieval sainthood. Others argue the delay wasn't just about virtue, it was strategy. Don't give him what he wants until he's given up everything else. You feel the strain. Henry's court is no longer just elegant, it's electric, brittle. Every conversation is loaded. Every silence feels like someone forgot their lines in a deadly play. You sit through a dinner where nobody mentions the Queen, and everyone pretends not to look at Anne. It's awkward. Like, I drop my fork and nobody will pick it up. Awkward. But Anne isn't flinching. You think maybe she should. Maybe she'd be safer that way. But she doesn't. Instead, she leans closer to the fire. By now, the king has made his intentions public. Catherine has been quietly removed from court. Anne starts appearing more prominently, seated at places of honour dressed in deeper colours, heavier jewellery. You walk with her through gardens where the paths curve like ambition. She holds her head high. She's playing the part, almost queen, but not yet. And it's not easy. The whispers are louder now. The people don't like her. They loved Catherine. They think Anne is a homewrecker, a witch, a schemer. A Spanish diplomat once called her the king's concubine. Anne hears it. Every word. She keeps walking. You're walking beside her, and you can almost feel the crown forming. Hot, heavy, invisible. still out of reach. Not for long. The garden paths are colder now. The rose bushes have dropped their blooms and the air smells of damp earth and something else, something heavier. You walk beside Anne, her cloak trailing against the gravel. Her posture is still perfect, but her fingers, those famous ring-laced fingers, fidget at the seams. The pressure is mounting and even she can't hide it. You've been watching this game unfold like a slow-burning chess match. But the board is getting crowded. The court is split, some rooting for Anne, others quietly sharpening their daggers. Henry, meanwhile, is doubling down. If you thought the annulment drama was dramatic, buckle up, because now we're in Reformation territory. Henry declares himself supreme head of the Church of England, just like that. Centuries of papal authority thrown out the window, because one man wanted a woman who wouldn't sleep with him until he did something utterly drastic. And no, you're not dreaming, this is real. You've just witnessed the birth of Anglicanism, brought to you by heartbreak and royal obsession. You follow Anne through the halls of Whitehall Palace. She's everywhere now, gilded, styled, and almost queen. People bow, some sneer behind their sleeves. She's received titles. Marquess of Pembroke is one, a carefully crafted step toward queenship. She's the first woman in English history to receive a noble title in her own right. You try to act casual, but even you have to admit, that's pretty metal. Still, it's awkward. At banquets, she sits where Catherine used to. At prayers, she murmurs the words a little too confidently. It's as if the ghost of the old queen is still hanging around, wringing her hands behind every tapestry, and people notice. You notice. Anne's influence is growing, sure, but so is the animosity. People call her arrogant, cunning, a bad omen. It doesn't help that she's taken up the Protestant cause, not as a theologian exactly, but as someone who lends books and whispers ideas to the king. She hands him treatises about reform, about the corruption of Rome, about royal supremacy. Some say she was the first English woman to own a copy of William Tyndale's banned Bible in English. Historians still argue whether she read it for personal faith, political leverage, or a bit of both. You sit in a private chamber, the walls draped in crimson, watching Anne read aloud. Her voice is calm but sharp. She's not trying to convert the court, she's just planting seeds, one here, one there. With every line, her influence tightens around the king like silk cords. And the king? He's finally done waiting. You're there, yes, really, when Henry secretly marries Anne in a quiet ceremony. No trumpets, no grand procession, just a few close courtiers, a vow whispered under breath, and a queen made overnight. It's so anticlimactic, you almost forget to be impressed. But Anne's face tells you everything. She knows this is only the beginning. Because being crowned queen is a formality. But carrying a son, that's the real challenge. Anne becomes pregnant almost immediately. The court, once a whisper factory, explodes. Suddenly everyone's smiling at her, blessing her, offering up prayers with suspicious sincerity. The promise of an heir, a male heir, is like honey on the air. Even Anne's worst enemies pause. Maybe she's not just a passing scandal. Maybe she's a dynasty. You watch her belly swell beneath the layers of damask and embroidery. She glows, not in that romanticised fairy tale way, but in the way a torch glows in the dark, defiant, flickering, not entirely safe. The baby is growing, and with it, the future of England trembles. The coronation is lavish, almost too lavish. Anne rides to Westminster Abbey in cloth of gold, crowned with St. Edward's crown itself, a symbol usually reserved for monarchs, not their wives. You trail behind the procession, noting the mixed reactions. Some cheer, others don't. And one person, an elderly nun near the abbey steps, murmurs a prayer that you really hope wasn't a curse. Anne's coronation is soaked in symbolism, but it doesn't quite erase the unease. The crowds are thinner than expected, the applause hesitant. She's queen, yes, but the public hasn't fallen for her. Not like they did with Catherine. The atmosphere shifts. She begins to feel it. So do you. Quirky detour. Anne reportedly had a motto sewn into her coronation robes, the most happy, a little ironic considering what's coming. Historians still argue whether she chose it defiantly or as a charm against her own rising dread. Either way, it doesn't age well. Back at court, Anne rules, sort of. She gives patronage, she writes letters, she hosts salons and walks garden paths as if her crown can't tip. But underneath the silk and pearls, she knows it all hinges on one tiny heartbeat. You sit with her late at night. The fire's low. She's rubbing her belly, murmuring to it. A lullaby? A prayer? Maybe both. Because for all the glamour, all the power and title and velvet-lined rooms, Anne is still balancing everything on one hope, that the child inside her is a boy. And finally, the baby comes. You're outside the chamber, with half the court, pacing holes into the carpet. The air is thick with anticipation. And then, soft crying. A nurse hurries past. You lean forward, breath caught. It's a girl, Elizabeth. Beautiful, healthy, red-cheeked and strong, but not a boy. Henry's disappointment is immediate. He doesn't shout, doesn't sulk, he just cools. A little too fast, like a feast going cold while still on the plate. Anne tries to smile through it. She holds the baby high. She tells everyone this is just the beginning, that a prince will come next. And maybe she believes it. You almost believe it too. But something shifted. You can feel it in the halls, the way people stop bowing quite so deeply, the way old allies suddenly seem busy. Anne is queen now, yes, but the winds are changing, and the clouds are gathering. The candles in the great hall flicker like they've heard the news too. A princess, not a prince, sleeps in her cradle of polished wood and lace, and the whole palace exhales the kind of breath that says, well, that's nice, I suppose. You trail Anne as she recovers, swaddled in fine linens, a silver pitcher of spiced wine beside her bed. She smiles at her daughter, truly smiles. Elizabeth has her mother's sharpness already, eyes wide, mouth set like she's measuring the world from her crib. But the room is too quiet, too still. Henry isn't here. You hear his boots in another hall thudding like regret. He was gracious enough at the christening, carried the baby, handed out coins, nodded at the nobles. But it was the kind of joy that's more about public optics than private satisfaction. And Anne, ever perceptive, knows it. Still, she tries. You see her writing letters to foreign courts, organising musicians to celebrate, scheduling audiences where she glows with the triumph of motherhood. But every time someone calls Elizabeth princess, there's a pause. Not the kind that begs for correction. Just a silence that says this wasn't what we paid for. The court begins to fidget. Anne's enemies sniff opportunity. You remember them. Old supporters of Catherine, ambitious lords and gossip-hungry ladies who smile too brightly. They've been waiting, lurking politely, and now they stir like bees around a cracked hive. Henry, meanwhile, begins to drift. He's still king, still powerful, still Anne's husband. But his gaze has cooled. You catch him at a hunt, where he laughs too loudly and doesn't mention his daughter once. At night he visits other chambers. The rumours start soft, then louder, then undeniable, and Anne hears every syllable. You sit with her one late afternoon as she pretends to read a book. The sunlight pools across the rug like a spilled goblet of gold. She hasn't turned the page in 10 minutes. She's thinking, planning, or maybe grieving quietly and without tears. She knows that one daughter won't be enough. So she tries again. You watch her walk slower, eat bland foods, accept charms and herbal infusions from her ladies. She consults astrologers, prays in the chapel and slips notes to her physician. This time, everyone hopes, it will be a boy. She conceives. The court braces itself. Henry, to his credit, seems interested again. Not adoring, but engaged. Like someone betting a second coin on a game they almost won last time. He visits more often, stands at Anne's side in public, kisses her hand with theatrical flair. But behind the curtain, he's growing colder. You hear it in his tone, see it in the new ladies he greets just a little too warmly. Still, Anne walks proud. Her belly swells once more. She starts planning a coronation for the son she's sure she'll have. New tapestries are woven. Names are discussed. You imagine her whispering them into the baby's ear just in case he can hear. Edward, Henry, Arthur. But fate doesn't care. The miscarriage is sudden. You're standing nearby when it happens. A scream, a rush of footsteps, then silence. Anne is pale, blood-soaked, trembling. You see the midwife's face, blank, tight-lipped. The bundle in her arms is tiny. Still. A boy. Gone. You sit with Anne afterward. She doesn't speak. Her face is turned to the wall. The fire crackles, offering no warmth. This is the moment where things truly begin to unravel, not with a scandal, not with betrayal, but with silence. An absence where hope used to be. Henry, informed of the news, doesn't come right away. When he does, he stays only minutes. No words of comfort, no attempt to hide the shift. Anne sees it. She nods, even thanks him. It's an act. She knows the choreography of disappointment all too well now. And then the whispers return. Henry starts spending more time with Jane Seymour, a quiet lady in waiting with blonde hair and the emotional intensity of a particularly polite wall tapestry. Jane is everything Anne isn't. Submissive, devout, soft-spoken. You hear her name in the halls more often. You watch Anne's shoulders tense when Jane passes. Historians still argue whether Jane actively plotted her rise or simply drifted into Henry's favour like a feather on royal wind. Either way, Anne knows what's happening. She recognises the symptoms. She was the symptoms once, but she's still queen, for now, and she's not giving up. She throws herself into diplomacy, charity and court policy. She petitions for religious reform. She corresponds with scholars. Some say she even tried to negotiate with Henry, offering another pregnancy as a peace offering. But Henry's patience, once obsessive, has curdled. Anne becomes more isolated. Her former allies grow distant. Some outright betray her. You hear a servant repeat something chilling one night. The king tires of her sharp tongue and barren womb, as if those are interchangeable sins. Quirky detail. Anne had a motto for her queenship too. The most happy. You remember it from her coronation robes. Now it hangs heavy with irony. Her private apartments are anything but happy. They echo. Still, she doesn't fall apart. Not outwardly. Anne Boleyn doesn't do that. Instead, she sharpens. Her humour grows biting, her glances knife-edged. She continues to play queen with a precision that makes her enemies nervous. And then, there's the ring. Anne gives Henry a ring with a tiny miniature of herself inside it. A gift, a reminder. You wonder if he ever wore it. Historians still argue whether that little locket symbolised love or desperation. You lean toward the second. Because Henry isn't the man he was. He's bloated now, tired. Power has hardened him. You watch Anne watch him, and you see it. Her calculation, her dread, her stubborn refusal to break. She knows the tides have turned, but she doesn't retreat. That's not her style. And even now, as the walls close in, she's still walking with her head high, still queen, for now. The air in the palace has changed. It's colder somehow, even when the fire crackles and tapestries hang thick on the walls. You feel it in the silences that stretch too long, in the eyes that no longer meet Anne's gaze. Her ladies still follow, still curtsy, still smile, but there's a stiffness in their movements, like dancers who know the song is about to end and no one's clapping. Henry barely visits now. When he does, the room dims a little, as if the sunlight itself would rather not bear witness. He makes excuses, hunts, meetings, headaches. But you both know where he's spending his time. Jane Seymour's wing. The woman who never speaks above a whisper, who always agrees, who bows a little deeper each day. Anne notices. Of course she notices. You watch her sit alone more often now. She writes letters, reads theological treatises, talks of scripture and reform, but her voice is thinner than it once was, like parchment stretched too far. The court used to orbit her. Now it tiptoes around her, like she's made of glass, or worse, already broken. Still, Anne doesn't flinch. You're with her when she walks into chapel, shoulders back, chin raised, daring anyone to question her place. She speaks to the servants with sharp warmth. She dresses in deep reds and golds, colours that announce power, even as it slips from her grasp. But Henry, he's already gone, and now whispers turn to murmurs. You catch them in the halls, behind tapestries, in hurried notes passed by candlelight. There are rumours of affairs, of flirtations, of inappropriate conversations with men of the court. Most laughable, that she's bewitched the king, that her unnatural hold is the result of sorcery. Because heaven forbid a woman just be clever and inconvenient. Historians still argue whether these rumours started with Anne's enemies or were planted by Henry's advisers looking to fast-track her downfall. But you see it, the careful setup, the narrative shift, the way people start speaking of her in the past tense. The king's new favourite, Jane, never raises her voice. She plays the innocent perfectly. You see her pass Anne in the corridor once. She drops her eyes, clasps her hands. Anne doesn't acknowledge her, doesn't blink. But you feel the temperature drop another degree. Anne is still queen, but her throne is shrinking. She's surrounded now, not by courtiers but by watchers, spies dressed as friends, listeners in the drapery. Every word she says is measured, weighed, and twisted, and yet she refuses to retreat. You see her laugh at court once, high and bright. Everyone freezes. She's performing, you think, holding the mask with trembling fingers, but she still wears it better than anyone else. And then it happens. Macassar, 1536, a date etched in cold ink. You're in her chamber when the knock comes, firm, official, unforgiving. The guards bow, but not in respect. They come with orders. Anne is under arrest. You feel your own chest tighten. She blinks, slow and deliberate, as if the words must travel through layers of disbelief. Arrested? On what grounds? Treason, adultery, incest, witchcraft. The absurdity would be funny if it weren't fatal. Anne doesn't scream. She straightens her gown. She nods once, tells her ladies to pack a small bag. Then calmly she walks with the guards, past the stunned courtiers, past the doors that no longer open for her, into the belly of the tower. The Tower of London looms ahead, grey, ancient, and all too familiar. You remember it from stories, from Catherine's nightmares, from generations of ghosts. Anne enters it not as a visitor, but as a prisoner. You follow. The doors close behind you with a sound that echoes far too long. Inside, the walls are thick. The air smells of damp stone and endings. Anne is taken to the Queen's lodgings, a cruel joke. The same rooms where she once celebrated her coronation. Now they're a cell. She asks for paper, a quill. She writes letters, to Henry, to her brother George, to anyone who might believe in her still. She doesn't beg, she reasons, she explains. She lists her accusers and their motivations. She knows the charges are nonsense. Everyone knows. But that's not the point. The point is that Henry wants her gone. You sit with her at night. She talks sometimes, quietly. She remembers her time in France, her daughter's laugh, a dress she once wore that made every woman jealous and every man nervous. Then she laughs, thin, bitter, and says something you don't forget. If I die, let me be remembered as I was, not as they say. A fringe detail floats up from the guards. Anne supposedly laughed when told of the charges. Not in mockery, but disbelief. It was so ridiculous, it was almost a relief. Historians still argue whether this happened or if it was added later to make her seem either fearless or mad. The list of men accused alongside her grows daily. Mark Smeaton, a court musician, Sir Henry Norris, William Brereton, Sir Francis Weston, even her own brother George Boleyn. The court doesn't care. Facts are ornamental now. The script is written. Anne will fall, but not just yet. You remain beside her in the tower. She prays. She weeps, but not often. Mostly, she thinks. Plots. Waits. She doesn't beg for mercy, because she knows there won't be any. It's quiet in the tower tonight. Too quiet. Even the guards have stopped shuffling, their boots silent against the stone. You're in Anne's chamber, sitting near the tiny hearth, where a reluctant fire struggles to stay lit. Anne is pacing, measured steps like she's counting heartbeats. She's always pacing now. The formal charges have been read. You heard them yourself, each word heavier than the last. Adultery, incest, conspiracy against the king. It's like a menu of royal doom. Anne didn't cry. Not in public. Instead, she tilted her chin and raised her eyebrows, as if waiting for the punchline that never came. You think back to when she wore a crown, when her silk swirled down marble halls and her voice carried like a song above the clatter of courtly nonsense. Now she's in a linen shift, her hair unbraided, her future reduced to scraps of paper and someone else's decisions. The trial begins soon. You arrive early. The tower's great hall is already packed. Nobles, clerks, officials, some here out of duty, some out of dread, and others simply hungry for a good spectacle. You can spot them by the way they smile too wide. Anne is brought in, flanked by guards. She walks slowly, every step deliberate. Her gown is plain, but she wears it like armour. Her gaze scans the room, pausing on the familiar faces now turned cold. And there's Henry. Not in person, of course. He won't risk the awkwardness. He's watching from afar, cloaked in distance and deniability. The proceedings are farcical. The evidence is flimsy, contradictory, and in some cases impossible. One affair allegedly occurred when Anne was recovering from childbirth. Another on a day she wasn't even in the same county. You'd laugh if it didn't feel like standing at the edge of a cliff. The accused men are tried first. You don't see them. We're not invited to those performances. But the verdicts come swiftly. Guilty. All of them. Every last one. No surprise, just dread. Then it's Anne's turn. She stands before her peers, 26 noblemen, many of whom she's dined with, danced with, smiled at across candlelit feasts. Now they pretend not to remember. They shuffle their robes, avoid her gaze, and let the trial unfold like a bad stage play. Anne defends herself. Her voice is steady, her tone sharp. She dismantles the accusations, pointing out timelines, impossibilities, and motivations. She names no names but makes it clear. These are lies, and everyone knows it. Historians still argue whether her defence changed any minds. Some say it earned her silent respect. Others say it sealed her fate, too confident, too composed, too unwilling to break. But the verdict is already written. Guilty, sentenced to death by beheading. You don't hear the gasps because there aren't any. Everyone expected this. That's the thing about Tudor trials. Once you're inside, you've already lost. Anne is returned to her chambers. You follow in silence. She sits near the window, looking out across the river. The sky is smeared with grey and orange, and the wind smells of rain and coal. She says nothing for a while. Then, so, this is how it ends. Not a question. A statement. She's not angry, just tired. The execution is scheduled, then delayed, then rescheduled. You're not surprised. The Crown has always been indecisive about when, exactly, it wants people to die. A few days later, Anne requests a priest. Confession. She clears her soul, or so they say. And no, she doesn't admit to any of the charges, because there's nothing to admit. She writes one last letter to Henry. You never get to read it. No one does. But you imagine it. Part plea, part memory, part warning. Maybe she told him she forgives him. Maybe she reminded him of Elizabeth. Maybe she just wanted her voice in his head one more time. There's a curious moment. Anne asks not to be executed by axe. She fears a botched job. Instead, she requests a French swordsman, cleaner, faster. More fitting for a woman who learned to smile with the edge of a blade, and surprisingly, Henry grants it. Quirky note. The swordsman is brought in secretly from Calais. The court doesn't announce it. Anne is told the night before. She thanks the messenger politely. And then, in the candlelight, she prays. The night before her death, she sleeps lightly. You sit across from her in the chair. She talks about Elizabeth, about her time in France, about a song she once heard in spring. And then she stops, looks at you, and smiles, just barely. Let them say what they will. I know who I was. At dawn she dresses herself. No servants, no fuss. No. She wears grey damask, a cloak of crimson, and a hood to cover her hair. You walk with her to the green, where the scaffold has been raised. The morning is pale and wet. A fine mist coats the wooden platform. A small crowd gathers, quiet, respectful, nervous. Anne climbs the steps without help. She looks smaller up there. Or maybe it's the sword waiting beside her. She addresses the crowd, brief, composed. She praises the king, thanks God, asks for prayers. No bitterness, no plea for justice, only grace. Historians still argue whether her speech was rehearsed, dictated, or sincere. It doesn't matter. What matters is the silence that follows. She kneels. Her ladies blindfold her gently. One steps back, sobbing silently, and the swordsman in black takes his place. You close your eyes. The blade flashes once, then nothing. No sound, just the end of something impossible. You remain still long after the crowd disperses. The sky opens slightly, and a single sunbeam touches the scaffold. Anne's body lies quiet, surrounded by silence and mist. Her head is placed in a simple chest, her body in another. No grand tomb, no inscription. But you remember, you always will. The court doesn't pause. Anne's body is still warm beneath the Tower Chapel floor when the palace begins to shift gears with machine-like efficiency. You're back in the great hall where nobles step carefully around the memory of what just happened, as if her ghost might be hiding behind the tapestry with the flaming sword. You listen to the new music playing, brighter, quicker, pretending not to echo the rhythm of mourning. Jane Seymour now walks the same corridors Anne once ruled, head lowered, hands folded. She's not crowned yet, but her presence has weight. The king's eyes follow her with something like relief, something like satisfaction. Anne's name is already vanishing. You hear it once or twice, whispered by the brave maids, then not at all. Her monogram, A.B., crowned, has been chiselled off the walls, her motto removed from tapestries, her portraits taken down. It's as if she never existed. But you remember. You remember how she walked, how she laughed too loud for court comfort, how she made everyone nervous simply by refusing to play the fool. And now she's gone, and something colder has taken her place. Henry seems lighter, not in body. He's growing heavier, but in manner. He smiles more, not kindly, but often. His courtiers mimic the new mood, eager to move on. One noble jokes that the tower has faster service than the kitchens. You don't laugh. Elizabeth, Anne's daughter, is just over 2 years old, too young to understand what's happened. She's taken from her household, stripped of her title princess, and placed under the care of Lady Bryan. Her clothes are cut back, her future blurred. You visit her nursery, where she plays with wooden toys and listens to soft music. Her governess calls her Lady Elizabeth now, with a tone that mourns the lost syllables. You watch the child, so small and sharp-eyed, and wonder how much she's already absorbing. She has her mother's eyes, her mother's silence. Anne's brother George is gone too, executed alongside her. The Boleyn family, once the rising star of court, has collapsed into disgrace. Thomas Boleyn, their father, returns to court in time, quietly, carefully. He survives by adapting, but something in his eyes is lost. Historians still argue whether Thomas grieved deeply or simply gritted his teeth and bowed lower. Perhaps both. That's how men survived in Tudor England. You walk the palace gardens where once Anne strolled in triumph and see new paths planted, new hedges, new roses, the old ones trimmed away. The metaphors practically write themselves. Henry marries Jane Seymour just 11 days after Anne's death. 11 days. The wedding is quiet, almost sombre, and yet everyone knows what it means. Henry is hoping desperately for the one thing Anne couldn't give him, a son. You sit in the chapel during their wedding mass, and the air feels tight, like the walls themselves are waiting for something to go wrong. Jane says nothing. Jane never says much. That's part of her charm, or so they say. Anne, had she been alive, might have said too much. In the following weeks, Henry restores order. Anne's supporters vanish. The reformist court she helped build is slowly diluted, not dismantled, but softened. He doesn't reverse everything she championed. He can't. But he scrubs her fingerprints from every corner. The English people, for the most part, accept it. They loved Catherine. They feared Anne. They don't know what to make of Jane. But they're tired of the noise, and Henry's new quiet suits them, for now. A fringe detail floats your way. Anne's dog, Percoy, refused food after her arrest. Jumped from a window, some say. Others insist he died of heartbreak. Historians still argue whether the story is true or just a tragic footnote pinned to a more tragic woman. You pass the tower one evening. The scaffold's been dismantled. The square scrubbed clean. But you know where it was. You feel it in your bones. Anne's grave is unmarked, under the chapel floor. A simple stone was later placed there, centuries after her death. Too late. Too quiet. But the court doesn't dwell. There are new distractions. War, politics, marriage negotiations. Henry, who once moved mountains for Anne, now pretends he merely tripped over her. And yet, you still hear her sometimes, in a phrase, in a glance. In the nervous way, Jane brushes her sleeves when someone says Queen too loudly. Anne may be gone, but her presence lingers. Not haunting, but remembered, in the uncomfortable way that truth remembers itself when everyone else has agreed to forget. One night you walk the corridors alone. A breeze rattles the window panes. Somewhere a lute plays the same melody Anne once hummed, and you think, the court moves on, but it doesn't heal. Not really, because Anne was never just a queen. She was a fire, and fire, once it burns, leaves marks no blade can erase. The moon is high over the nursery now, casting a pale wash across the floor where little Elizabeth toddles in silence, her red gold hair catching the light like copper spun into thread. You sit nearby, not interfering, just watching, because even at 2 she doesn't like to be told what to do. She stacks wooden blocks with the same quiet purpose her mother once used to dismantle an entire court with a glance. Elizabeth isn't a princess anymore. That title was stripped with bureaucratic neatness the moment Anne's head left her body. Now she's Lady Elizabeth, a polite way of saying, still royal, but in the kind of royal family no one mentions in polite company. And yet even the servants seem unsure how to treat her. She's not like the other children. She listens too closely. She stares too long, as if she already knows she was born from a scandal. Her new governess, Lady Margaret Bryan, writes that Elizabeth is as toward a child and as gentle of conditions as ever I knew any in my life. It's a formal way of saying she's clever, but don't get too attached. Henry doesn't visit, hardly speaks of her. His attention is elsewhere. Jane Seymour is now queen and very pregnant. You watch the court lean back into hope again. The mood shifts. Everything is lighter, more cautious, like no one wants to jinx it this time. And when the child arrives, a son, Edward, the bells ring for days. Henry is beside himself. He names the boy his heir, calls him a miracle, and finally exclaims that God has smiled upon England. You look at Elizabeth still in the nursery, still too young to understand that her half-brother's birth has made her an afterthought, but she doesn't cry. Anne's blood runs quiet but steady in her. And you realise this isn't a sad story. Not entirely. Because though Anne is gone, she's not forgotten. Not by her daughter. Not by the handful of reformists she supported. Not by the people who still whisper her name with awe or anger or both. Still, the Tudor court forgets quickly, at least on the surface. There's a new heir, a new queen. Elizabeth is moved to Hatfield House, raised mostly away from court. She grows up under the care of tutors, physicians and distant relatives. Her mother's memory is mostly banned from polite conversation. But you notice something. Elizabeth keeps asking questions. She collects knowledge like Anne collected glances, Latin, Greek, French. She learns statecraft before she can spell her full name. Her tutors report that she argues points of theology better than grown men. She's serious, studious, a little severe. Sound familiar? And while the court ignores her, she watches everything. The changing queens, the shifting alliances, the rumours. She learns that being noticed is dangerous, but being forgotten can be fatal. And so she threads a fine line. Not too loud, not too meek. You remember Anne saying once, "If I die, let me be remembered as I was." Elizabeth hears that too. Not in words, but in the quiet disapproval of noblemen who think women shouldn't read too much. In the side glances when she asks about her mother and the room goes still. She pieces it together on her own. Who Anne was, what happened, why. But back in court things are less poetic. Henry's triumph doesn't last. Jane Seymour dies shortly after childbirth. Complications, fever, exhaustion. Henry mourns her deeply, or at least publicly. He wears black, doesn't remarry for years, and elevates Jane's memory to something saint-like. You wonder how Anne would have felt about that. Probably rolled her eyes hard enough to rattle the tapestries. You return to Hatfield, where Elizabeth sits in a sunlit corner, reading Cicero with her tutor and correcting his pronunciation. She's 6 now, sharp as ever. And even at this age, she's learning that her name carries weight. Dangerous weight. Because no matter how many times the court pretends Anne Boleyn never existed, Elizabeth can't help but look like her. It's not just the colouring, it's the posture, the precision, the smile that seems to know more than it should. You see it. Everyone sees it. And yet, no one speaks of it. One of the more fringe rumours making the rounds is that Anne's ghost walks the Tower Green. Pale, headless, gliding near the spot where the scaffold once stood. Historians still argue whether these tales are courtly superstition or lingering guilt in physical form. You don't see her ghost. Not there. You see it in Elizabeth. A flick of the eye. A stubborn silence. The way she refuses to accept things as they are just because someone tells her to. Elizabeth is growing, watching, waiting. And while her brother Edward is polished and paraded as the future king, Elizabeth quietly builds herself into someone no one can ignore for long. The court doesn't see her coming, but you do. You always did. There's a chill in the halls again. Not from the weather, but from the way people have started looking at Anne's memory like it's a room no one wants to walk into. A locked door at the end of the corridor. You're back at court now, trailing just behind the whispers, watching the slow, deliberate decay of a legacy that once lit fires under royal feet. Anne Boleyn is still queen, technically, in name only, buried in documents and ink, crossed out with careful revisions. But what really interests you now is how her shine has dimmed. It's not sudden, not some dramatic toppling. It's a slow fade. A court that once styled itself around her now dresses in the pale silence of Jane Seymour. Rich brocades have dulled. Jokes are gentler. Ambition wears a quieter face. Even the music has changed. Less French flair, more solemn chant. You miss the fire, the tension, the crackle of Anne's presence. So does everyone else, though no one admits it. You notice it most in the people who used to smile too hard around her. Thomas Cranmer, Archbishop of Canterbury, once an ally, now cautious, distant. Thomas Cromwell, her former political instrument, is thriving, if colder than ever. He's helping reshape England around Henry's mood swings. And Anne? She's the cautionary tale sewn into every whispered warning. A fringe bit of gossip floats your way. Someone has taken to calling Anne the concubine queen again. It comes up in letters from Spain, sermons in the countryside, even a few dinner party jabs. Not new, but louder now. With Henry's approval no longer shielding her, old insults find new legs. You pause by the fire in one of the lesser halls, listening to a group of ladies-in-waiting laugh too loudly. One of them mimics Anne's accent, mocking that faint French twist she never shook. Another reenacts her fall from favour as if it were a comedy. You think about how those same mouths once praised her embroidery, and yet Anne isn't forgotten, not entirely. There's a new danger now. Revision. Not the literal kind, not yet, but the slow erosion of character through court gossip and Henry's selective memory. The king has begun rewriting the story. He speaks of Anne as a mistake, a lesson, a dangerous woman whose ambition undid not only her marriage but nearly England itself. You hear it in the way he talks about Elizabeth too, or doesn't. He rarely mentions her, save for the occasional half-hearted "she is well" passed along by a secretary. You see his affection stored elsewhere, on Edward, the son who carries all the burden of dynasty, and Elizabeth, still quiet, still reading, still waiting. You accompany her on walks around the gardens of Hatfield. She listens to birdsong like it's a lecture. When her tutor tries to correct her Latin, she blinks once, slow, deliberate, and continues in flawless syntax. You almost laugh. Anne would have done the same, but you see something else now too. Anne's influence, though airbrushed out of official records, is taking root in other subtler ways. The court is changing because of her. Henry's break with Rome, initiated to have her, can't be undone. Protestant ideas continue to drift through court like incense. Clergymen are whispering about scripture in English. New Bibles printed in secret are making their way across borders. Anne lit that fuse. It's still burning. Historians still argue whether Anne truly believed in reformist theology or used it as a tool to manipulate Henry. But it doesn't matter anymore. The movement has momentum and it wears her fingerprints whether she intended it or not. There's a moment that stays with you. A small boy, the son of a courtier, recites the Lord's Prayer in English instead of Latin. His mother scolds him, panicked. The walls have ears. But the boy shrugs. He says, "Lady Elizabeth's mother taught the king to read this way." And you pause. Anne is still here, in the edges, in the children, in the books she gave, the ideas she loved, the daughter she left behind. And yet, the pressure grows. You sit through a banquet one evening watching nobles toast Jane Seymour's memory. She's now the perfect queen, of course. Dead women tend to be. Henry sighs about her sweetness, her obedience, her lack of political opinions. The contrast is not accidental. Someone asks if he thinks Elizabeth could be queen someday. Henry laughs, says she's a fine girl, but not that fine. The table joins him. You do not. The truth is, the court is afraid of Elizabeth, not because she's dangerous now, but because she might be, because they remember her mother's eyes, and her fire, and the way she once turned a kingdom upside down. There's a phrase you hear often. She has her mother's spirit. It's always said with a little fear and a little awe. Anne Boleyn might be gone from the throne, from the court, from the tapestries, but she's not gone. Not really, because legacies don't vanish. They evolve, they slip through cracks, they bloom when no one's looking, and one day they return. The court's rhythm no longer matches yours. Everything now beats to the slow thud of suspicion. You can feel it in the echo of every footstep on stone, in the pause before anyone answers a question. After Anne's fall, something permanent broke in the Tudor court. People smile less now, not because they're sad, but because they've learned what happens when smiles are mistaken for intentions. And yet, it's almost funny, if your humour runs dark. Because Anne wasn't undone by poison or armies or even her political enemies. She was undone by the oldest weapon in courtly history, flirtation, or more accurately, the accusation of it. You remember the trial, but it's worth rewinding the tape. Flirting with another man, while married to the king, was more than a faux pas. It was treason, if proven, which of course it wasn't. But Tudor justice didn't need proof, it needed momentum. And Anne? She had the wrong kind of gravity. The charges against her were absurd. She'd supposedly seduced multiple men, including Mark Smeaton, a court musician, Sir Henry Norris, Henry's trusted friend, Sir Francis Weston, and others. Even her own brother, George Boleyn. The court accused her of adultery, incest, and plotting the king's death. In one particularly ludicrous claim, she was said to have committed adultery on dates she was documented to be elsewhere, like during her postnatal recovery. Because, nothing says passion like post-birth cramps. Historians still argue whether Thomas Cromwell orchestrated the charges as revenge, perhaps because Anne opposed some of his reforms, or whether Henry pushed for the case himself, looking for a clean escape. Either way, the results were tidy. Suspiciously tidy. You think back to the interrogations. Mark Smeaton, likely tortured, was the only one who confessed. The others denied everything. George Boleyn's trial was particularly cruel. The charges of incest with his sister were based on nothing but innuendo and the king's sour mood. Still, George stood tall, even joked, until the very end. Anne's enemies were methodical. They didn't just accuse her, they erased her, step by step. And yet, what stands out most from that time isn't the cruelty. It's how little Anne actually did wrong. She was bold, yes. She challenged the king, yes. She promoted new thinkers, laughed too loudly, danced too freely. But flirtation, affairs, treason, no. She was guilty of ambition in a world that preferred its women silent, and ambition, in the Tudor court, was the most seductive sin of all. The court starts rewriting the narrative. Anne becomes dangerous, a bad omen, a cautionary tale, and Jane Seymour? Her contrast is perfect, demure, silent, fertile, or so they hope. She's already betrothed to the king by the time Anne's trial begins, and when Anne is gone, Jane's marriage to Henry follows faster than you can say next. But you're still in the tower, still with Anne in those final weeks before her execution. That's when the reality of the charges really settles in. She paces, she prays, she reflects. There are no tears now. She's moved past that. The woman who once danced in silk at Henry's side now studies the walls like they owe her answers. You sit with her in the quiet hours as she recites the charges out loud, not in disbelief anymore, but with the dry sarcasm of someone reading a badly written play. She mocks them sometimes. "I supposedly committed treason in March," she once says, while recovering from childbirth in bed. "How romantic," she jokes, but her hands still shake. One night she tells you a dream. She was walking through a garden with Elizabeth hand in hand. The flowers all bowed to her daughter. But the garden ended in a wall, high, stone, impenetrable. Elizabeth let go and climbed it alone. You don't ask what she thinks it means. You already know. It's legacy, and fear, and the knowledge that her daughter will have to climb walls she never could. You remember her interactions with the accused men. Norris had been close to Henry, loyal, a good man. She may have teased him once about remarrying if the king died. That single moment, twisted by the court, became proof of her treason. Weston, young and foolish. Smeaton, an outsider, vulnerable and easily pressured. George, her brother, was the only one who truly knew her. His fall was Anne's breaking point. When he was executed, she broke for the first time, not in front of others, but at night, when only shadows could see. You were there. She didn't weep. She screamed, not loudly, just once, but it was enough to split the air. And yet, the tragedy isn't that Anne was too bold, it's that she was too visible. In a world built to crush interesting women, Anne Boleyn had the audacity to be fascinating. And when that became inconvenient, the court reacted not with correction, but with erasure. You attend the executions of the accused men. It rains. No one speaks. The blade falls again and again, and Anne, she's left to wait. The sword delayed. The date postponed. The queen, former queen, is told to hold her breath while the world forgets her. You never forget. Not the trials, not the charges, not the way power turns affection into accusation when it suits the mood. Because Anne Boleyn didn't fall because she flirted. She fell because she refused to fall in line. The sky over the tower is grey again, but not the dramatic storm grey of storybooks. This is the dull, smothered grey of long waiting, the kind that makes time drag its feet and sigh heavily. You're back in the Queen's lodgings. Not that anyone calls them that anymore. Anne has stopped pacing, stopped joking. Not out of surrender, but out of calculation. You sit with her beside the small window where the view is mostly stone and regret. She looks thinner, not fragile, just carved down to the essentials. Her voice is quieter, but when she does speak, it's sharp, unmissable. She's a woman measuring her final hours not in tears, but in the precise order of what needs to be said. And yet there's a strange calm about her now, almost eerie. She's made peace with what's coming. You haven't. The tower guards say little, but one tells you the French swordsman has arrived, discreetly. Anne asked for him. No axe, no risk of suffering, just a clean cut. She's pragmatic to the end. You step outside with her briefly. The garden is quiet, the flowers recently cut back. She pauses to touch a rose stem, careful not to flinch at the thorn. Too late to learn softness, she says. You try to answer, but what would you say? That she deserved better? She already knows that. The night before her execution, Anne asks for the sacrament. She confesses, but again she proclaims her innocence. No sin, no treason, no affair. She prays for Henry even now, and you wonder if it's faith, performance, or pity. Historians still argue whether Anne forgave Henry, whether those final prayers were sincere or simply tactical. A queen's last manoeuvre on a chessboard already flipped. But you were there. You heard the tremble in her voice when she said his name. She meant it. The hours slip by. Dawn breaks. The execution was originally scheduled for May 18th, but now it's May 19th. Henry delayed it. Why? Some say logistics, others say nerves, or guilt. You suspect it was a power move, to remind her she wasn't even in control of that. You help her dress. She chooses a dark grey gown with a crimson underskirt, modestly cut, heavy in fabric but not in ornament. Over it she places a black mantle. Around her neck, a gold cross. Her hair, long and dark, is pinned up carefully. She won't wear her hood. Not today. Outside, a small crowd has gathered. Not nobles, not many, but enough. Some are here to witness history, some out of morbid curiosity. A few, perhaps, to offer silent respect. You walk beside her to the scaffold. The tower green is smaller than you expect. The grass short, damp. The platform is plain, just wood and silence. The French executioner stands ready, his sword hidden behind his back so she won't see it coming. Anne climbs the steps. Her ladies follow, trembling. One holds a handkerchief, another carries a small book of prayers. The wind stirs Anne's cloak, but she stands firm. She speaks. It's not a long speech, but it is unforgettable. Good Christian people, I am come hither to die, according to law, and therefore I will speak nothing against it. I am come hither to accuse no man, nor to speak anything of that whereof I am accused and condemned to die. But I pray God save the king, and send him long to reign over you. She says the king has always been good and gentle. She says she dies with no bitterness. She asks for prayers. And then she kneels. Her ladies step forward. One ties the blindfold. Another helps tuck in her dress so nothing flutters. Anne adjusts her posture. She says softly, "To Jesus Christ I commend my soul. Lord Jesus, receive my soul." The executioner steps back a pace. He calls to his assistant for the sword, not because he needs it, but to distract her. In that moment, mid-turn, mid-breath, he swings. You do not look away. The sound is less than you imagined. A single, clean stroke. Her body slumps forward. Her head falls into the straw. No scream, no cry. Just silence, rushing in to fill the space where she stood. Her ladies gather her body gently. Place it in a simple wooden chest. An old arrow box, someone whispers. Her head is placed beside it. No royal coffin, no procession, no grand burial. Anne Boleyn, Queen of England, is laid to rest in an unmarked grave beneath the Tower's chapel, and that is that. But of course it isn't, because the Tower does not forget, nor do the stones of court, nor does the child, Elizabeth, who will one day return here in her own time as Queen and pass judgment over the very halls that tried to erase her mother. Fringe detail? The swordsman was paid handsomely, then sent away with haste. He vanished from English records entirely. Some say he returned to France and never spoke of it again. Historians still argue whether he understood the weight of what he'd done. You stand in the quiet afterward, long after the others have left. The grass is still wet, the sky still grey. But the silence? It hums. Anne Boleyn is gone. But the echoes? They're just getting started. The wind shifts again, but this time you feel something different. It's not grief. It's not the hollow quiet of mourning. It's that eerie, bureaucratic hum of a machine, already preparing for the next page. Anne's blood hasn't dried beneath the Tower Chapel floor, and yet the court is, somehow, briskly reorganising itself, as if she were merely a misplaced ledger entry. You trail through the palace corridors, half expecting to hear her heels clicking over the stone, but her presence is already being painted over. In one hallway, a servant peels a gilded A monogram from a wall tapestry. In another, a portrait vanishes overnight, even in private quarters, where she once laughed over court gossip and passed love notes folded like fans. Her name is spoken in past tense, if at all. You find yourself watching Henry now, and the man you see is not the one who once wrote love letters in flowery French or gifted his affection like a sunbeam in armour. This version of Henry is harder. He doesn't look away when things get cruel. He signs documents with startling speed. He wears black, but not long. In fact, only 10 days after Anne's execution, he marries Jane Seymour. 10 days. You sit at that quiet wedding, surrounded by faces still struggling to keep up. Some avoid eye contact, others smile far too much. You wonder if they feel as you do, like a curtain has dropped on one play only to find the same actors scrambling into new costumes without intermission. Jane is gentle. That's the word people keep using. Gentle. As if gentleness is armour, as if obedience will save her. Anne might have smirked at that. The new queen is everything Anne wasn't. Mild-mannered, pale, deferential, and this contrast is no accident. Jane doesn't interrupt. She doesn't debate scripture. She doesn't wear foreign silks. Even her hair stays modestly arranged. The court breathes easier around her, and you realise they were never afraid of Anne's crimes. They were afraid of her mind. Henry seems pleased, relieved even. He praises Jane's virtue, her simplicity, her humility. 3 qualities that, notably, never made it into his love poems to Anne. And with this new union comes the one thing Henry has chased through 3 queens: a son. It takes time, of course, but Jane becomes pregnant within a year. Henry is ecstatic. Planned celebrations, commissioned prayers flood the churches. A boy. It must be a boy. God would not, could not, tease him again. You can feel the pressure rise in the palace like steam under a locked lid. Elizabeth, meanwhile, is quietly tucked away, still stripped of her title, still watched, still growing. You hear almost nothing about her now. She sends letters, studies languages, listens to everything, and never once does she ask for what was taken from her. She simply waits, like someone sharpening a knife you can't see, and yet Anne's ghost continues to drift through the edges of it all. In court poetry, in household gossip, in the strange looks that pass between older courtiers who knew her when she was queen. She's no longer a person to them. She's a shadow, a symbol. Some see her as a warning, others as a martyr. Most just try to forget her altogether. You can't. One evening, as you stroll through the royal chapel, you pass a stone marked only faintly, a barely visible letter A. You wonder who dared to carve it. A servant? A loyal friend? A quiet act of resistance? Historians still argue whether Anne's memory was ever truly feared or just inconvenient. But you know the truth, because forgetting her would have been easy if she hadn't been so visible, if she hadn't stirred so many. And now it's time to watch Jane. She gives birth in October 1537. The bells of London ring for hours, bonfires crackle, ale flows like water. Henry weeps openly. Edward is here, the Tudor heir, the promise fulfilled. But the cost is staggering. Jane dies of postnatal complications less than 2 weeks later. And with that you see Henry break in a new way. He grieves. He locks himself away. He refuses to speak for days, and when he emerges something is different. Not with his grief, but with his narrative. Suddenly Jane is his true wife, the one he should have had all along, the one who gave him a son and asked for nothing. He calls her the only one he truly loved. You raise an eyebrow at that. Anne would have thrown something, and maybe she does, symbolically at least, because you're starting to notice a pattern. Every woman who loves Henry, every woman who gives him power, ends up either dead, exiled, or rewritten. Catherine was dismissed. Anne was executed, Jane was buried, and yet somehow they all linger. You watch Henry age, his leg ulcer worsens, he grows larger, slower, more irritable, but he still commands, still signs, still edits the past to suit his comfort, and in that past, Anne becomes a footnote, a dangerous flirt, a tragic fool, or worse, an afterthought. But then one evening, a curious moment. A visiting ambassador mentions Anne's name in passing. Henry doesn't respond for a long while. Then he says softly, "She had her uses." You don't breathe, because that is the closest thing to respect you're going to get. Anne Boleyn had her uses, but you know better. She had her impact. She reshaped the crown, the church, the very architecture of power. And even now, as her name is scrubbed from court records and painted over in portraits, you can feel it. Her story isn't done. It's merely paused. Because there's a little girl in Hatfield who hasn't forgotten, and neither have you. You're back in the long gallery now. The torches burn low. Shadows stretch out like stories that refuse to end. You move through Henry's court like a ghost yourself, watching the world tick forward while pretending nothing cracked. But there's a hollow in the centre of it all. Not because Anne is gone, but because no one dares say what she meant. You pass courtiers who once sang her praises. They talk now of her follies, her temper, her pride, all with the tone of men who burn old letters before anyone can read them. Henry, meanwhile, is looking for a new wife. You almost want to laugh. He's not even pretending anymore. This is an assembly line. He dispatches diplomats across Europe to hunt noble brides like falcons in a royal field. Protestant or Catholic, it doesn't matter. What matters is fertility, obedience, and good ankles. Preferably all three. You've stopped expecting subtlety. And then Anne of Cleves. She arrives from Germany with decent lineage and a strong Protestant connection. Henry, hoping for a political win, agrees to marry her sight unseen. Thomas Cromwell arranges it, swearing she's attractive, intelligent, a perfect fit. Until Henry sees her. You're in the corridor when he does. His face falls. He whispers to his advisers that she looks like a Flanders mare. You cringe. It's a cruel, ridiculous thing to say, and possibly untrue. Historians still argue whether Anne of Cleves was actually unattractive or simply not Henry's type. Regardless, the marriage is doomed from first glance. They marry, barely speak, do not consummate. Within months the annulment process begins, and now Thomas Cromwell, once Anne Boleyn's key ally-turned-executioner, finds himself accused of treason. You see it in Henry's eyes. He's tired of being made a fool. Cromwell, the architect of Anne's downfall, now finds himself dragged to the same tower, and eventually to the same scaffold. The irony is heavy, like velvet in summer. Henry marries again, Catherine Howard, young, beautiful, and dangerously unprepared. She reminds you of a courtly songbird, singing loudly in a room full of cats. She dances, flirts, laughs. Henry, nearly 3 decades older, watches her like she's a second chance at youth. You watch her like she's an accident in slow motion. She's unfaithful, yes, but not cruel, not calculated, just naive. And for that, she too is executed. Anne Boleyn once stood accused of the same crimes. The difference? Anne was strategic. Catherine was careless. Yet both end up the same way, kneeling on a block with the world watching and history sharpening its quill. Another fringe note. Some say Catherine Howard ran screaming from her chambers when told she would die. Others say she practiced placing her head on the block the night before. Historians still argue which version is true. Maybe both are. Either way, Henry doesn't flinch this time. And now you begin to see it. This isn't a story of queens, it's a pattern of power. Henry isn't choosing wives, he's trying on legacies. Each woman is another attempt to rewrite the story he can't quite control. Catherine of Aragon was loyalty, Anne Boleyn was fire, Jane Seymour was obedience, Anne of Cleves, diplomacy, Catherine Howard, youth, and each one ends up either discarded, dead, or diminished. Then Catherine Parr. You breathe a little easier. She's older, wiser, quiet in public but shrewd behind closed doors. She reads Latin, she discusses theology, and crucially, she knows how not to become a story. You see her play the game carefully. She nurses Henry in his final years, when his leg ulcer keeps him confined and his moods turn to thunder. She survives by knowing when to speak and when to vanish into silence. She outlives him. And now, the great Henry VIII, once the most powerful man in Europe, is bloated, broken, and buried beneath layers of regret. Anne Boleyn's legacy? It's still rattling the windows, because despite all the rewriting, all the gossip, all the erasure, the thing Henry could never destroy was the consequence of Anne's existence. Elizabeth. The girl in the shadows. The one watching. She's growing still. Not loud, not wild, but sharp. Purposeful. You remember walking with Anne once through the gardens. She'd said, "It's not enough to be remembered. One must shape the remembering." Elizabeth is listening, and soon she'll act. But for now, the court shifts once more. Henry is gone. The regency begins. Edward is king, but too young to rule. Protestant advisors step in, shaping the kingdom in new ways. For a brief moment, Anne's ghost smiles. Her daughter might have a chance, but nothing is guaranteed. The pattern still looms. Power is still dangerous. And women in this world, they're always one mistake away from vanishing. Still. Anne's fire hasn't gone out. It's merely changed form. It walks in Elizabeth's footsteps. And the kingdom, it doesn't see her coming. The fire is low again. You sit in a quiet corner of the court, but the faces have changed. Henry is gone now, buried in a tomb beside Jane Seymour, the one he chose to be remembered with, the one who gave him a son and died before she could ever disappoint him. Typical, really. But the story doesn't end with his death. In fact, you know, by now, it never does. Because the ghosts of Henry's marriages still wander these halls, and the parade of wives. It wasn't just spectacle, it was prophecy, dressed in pearls and panic. You watched Anne Boleyn fall, yes, but 5 other women would follow her into the role of queen consort. None fared particularly well. Let's walk the winding hallway of regret together. You remember Jane Seymour, sweet, quiet Jane. She gave Henry what he wanted, a son, and died before she could say too much. She was praised for her piety, her obedience, her silence, but no one remembers her laugh, or if she ever had one. Then came Anne of Cleves. Poor Anne, smart, kind, politically useful, and completely unsuited for Henry's vanity. The king declared her unattractive upon arrival, then blamed her for it. But in a twist of fate, Anne survived. She agreed to an annulment, kept her head, and walked away with a title, property, and peace. She outlived Henry, watched his other wives fall like dominoes, and spent her days in quiet comfort. You suspect she chuckled often, off stage, and then Catherine Howard. Ah, Catherine. Anne Boleyn's first cousin, youthful, radiant, reckless. Married Henry at just 17, she thought she could dance through it, thought charm was protection. But the court never forgets. Past liaisons came to light. Gossip bloomed into accusation. You stood at the back of the crowd as she was led to the scaffold, trembling. Her last words reportedly, "I die a queen, but I would rather have died the wife of Culpeper." Whether true or not, the tragedy stuck. Historians still argue how much Catherine understood her role, whether she was naive or defiant or simply doomed from the start. It doesn't matter. The blade doesn't ask for clarity. And finally, Catherine Parr, the 6th, the survivor. She's the only one who outlived Henry. Clever, literate, cautious, She played the long game, married him late in his life, when his fury had softened into rot. She nursed him, kept his temper in check, and secretly supported the Protestant cause, a widow's wisdom. When Henry died, she remarried for love, finally for love. But even then, fate wasn't done. She died in childbirth not long after. So yes, 6 queens, 2 executed, 2 died, 1 divorced, 1 survived. You feel the list rattle in your bones. It's become a chant, a caution, a bitter nursery rhyme. Divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. But Anne's fate always stands tallest among them, because she wasn't just a wife. She was a revolution in a velvet bodice. She didn't follow the pattern, she made one, and the others walked paths carved by her rise and fall. Each woman who entered Henry's orbit was measured against Anne. Her wit, her sharp tongue, her downfall. You hear it in how people talk. Not as bold as Boleyn, they'd say. Better keep her head down, or off. And even now, years after her death, Anne Boleyn is a warning. A story mothers whisper to their daughters. A name scrawled in the margins of political sermons. You walk through Hampton Court again, older than when you first arrived. You remember her voice echoing down these halls. Now it's Jane's face on the tapestries, but Anne's footsteps you still imagine behind you. Henry's son, Edward VI, now sits on the throne, but he's a child. A thoughtful one, yes, raised Protestant, raised to rule. But he's a boy in a lion's chair. His regents, noblemen with shifting loyalties, pull the strings. Reform continues. The Catholic Church fades further. Anne somewhere might smile, but power is never secure. And Edward is not long for this world. In a few years he will die young, just 15, sickly, quiet, gone before his vision can take root. And then the line of succession twists again. Mary, Henry's eldest daughter, Catherine of Aragon's girl, will take the throne. She's Catholic, devout, steeped in memory, and she remembers everything, especially Anne. When Mary becomes queen, England snaps backward like a rubber band. Protestantism is punished, heretics burned, reforms reversed. Anne's ghost is declared a heresy all its own. You watch Elizabeth, Anne's daughter, step carefully. She plays the dutiful sister, attends Catholic masses, smiles at Mary's allies, but inside she's made of steel annealed by fire. Anne's fire. She's waiting again, always waiting. Mary dies in 1558. And then, finally, history's breath catches. Elizabeth becomes queen. You remember the girl who played quietly in the corner of Hatfield House? The girl who asked questions when everyone else stayed quiet? The girl who had her mother's eyes and the world's expectations? Now she wears the crown her mother once only imagined, and somewhere beneath the tower, in a grave without fanfare, Anne Boleyn rests, not alone, but triumphant. It's coronation day, and you're standing in the sun-drenched heart of Westminster Abbey, somewhere between awe and disbelief. The stone walls echo with choir voices and polished trumpet notes. The scent of incense lingers like the ghost of every queen who didn't make it this far. Elizabeth Tudor, daughter of Anne Boleyn, once declared illegitimate, once quietly forgotten, is now Queen of England. And you remember. You remember the corridor where Anne once whispered to Elizabeth's cradle. You remember the silence that followed Anne's death. You remember the way no one ever expected this. Yet here she is. Elizabeth wears a cloth of gold gown that catches the light like ripples on a lake. Her red hair gleams beneath the weight of St. Edward's crown. When she stands before the altar, her face is unreadable, regal, measured, but in her eyes, you see it. That spark, that calculated fire, Anne's fire. The ceremony unfolds like a spell. Oaths, blessings, trumpets, and when the final acclamation is shouted, God save Queen Elizabeth, you feel the shift in the room. The past, long buried beneath layers of denial and convenient forgetting, rises with her. Elizabeth doesn't mention her mother that day, not once. No dedications, no medals, no portraits, just silence. And yet that silence says everything. Because her entire reign will be shaped by the shadow of Anne Boleyn. You follow Elizabeth back to Whitehall, where the court is already transforming. Gone are the grey tones and funeral silks of Mary's reign. In come brighter fabrics, sharper minds, and the cautious optimism of a country unsure whether to celebrate or brace for impact. Elizabeth surrounds herself with smart, loyal advisers, Cecil, Walsingham, Dudley, men who understand that power is a delicate game of masks and memory. But you notice something else too. Her court is not Henry's. It's not even Mary's. It's hers, and it feels different. The Queen walks alone. No husband, no king consort, no heirs lined up behind her. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth truly intended to remain unmarried or simply played the game until the very end. But you suspect she never forgot what happened to her mother when love and power collided. She saw the warning, and she learned. Instead of romance, she chooses image. She becomes Gloriana, the Virgin Queen, wedded to her people, untouchable. Her portraits grow more symbolic with each year. Faces fade beneath white powder, shoulders draped in pearls and allegory. Elizabeth becomes less a person than a myth. And myths, as she well knows, are harder to kill. Still, the past claws at the edges. You hear whispers in the chapel. Anne's bones still lie under the floor, unmarked, unmoved. Elizabeth never orders her mother's body reburied, never commissions a grand tomb. She never speaks Anne's name in public. But privately, different story. One day, you spot a new locket ring on the Queen's finger. A quiet piece of jewellery, elegant but unassuming. Inside it, 2 portraits, one of Elizabeth, the other a woman with dark eyes and a crown of French lace. Anne, a secret keepsake, a silent monument. Another time, a foreign ambassador records that Elizabeth once snapped at a courtier for referring to her mother as that concubine. She reportedly said, "Do not speak of my mother that way. She was my mother, and a queen." It doesn't happen often, but it happens. She remembers. And through her rule, you see Anne's legacy sharpen. In the Education Acts, in the push for Protestant consolidation, in the brilliant propaganda, in every careful, clever manoeuvre Elizabeth makes. Where Anne once spoke too boldly, Elizabeth speaks in riddles. Where Anne leaned on fire, Elizabeth channels ice. But beneath it all, they are the same woman, split by time. There's a fringe account you stumble upon, probably fiction, maybe not. A courtier once claimed that Elizabeth, late in life, visited the tower in secret, walked the green alone, stood near the chapel, said nothing, just stood there, listening. Historians still argue whether that walk ever happened, but you believe it, because she knew. She knew where she came from, knew what price was paid for her crown, and you never stopped seeing it. Elizabeth rules for decades. She faces war, plague, rebellion, betrayal, and still she endures. She becomes legend. But somewhere beneath the layers of pearl and power, in the rooms where no one listens, Elizabeth sometimes stares into the fire a little too long. And you wonder what she's seeing. A face, a voice, a moment before the fall. Anne Boleyn did not get to raise her daughter, but her daughter raised her legacy. From silence, from ashes, and turned it into a crown. You walk the stone corridors now as if retracing someone else's steps, because in a way you are. Elizabeth's reign, long and labyrinthine, stretches out before you like the red carpet of history, carefully unfurled to cover all the messy footprints underneath. She is queen, not by accident, not by marriage, not even by birthright strictly speaking, but by sheer force of will. And through it all, Anne's ghost walks just a few steps behind. You sit through council meetings where Elizabeth listens more than she speaks. When she finally does, her words are precise and polished. She says just enough to keep people wondering where she stands. You recognise the tactic. Anne taught it to the world, and the world learned not to trust women who think too quickly. And yet, here's her daughter, outthinking everyone. Elizabeth becomes a master of control, of image, of distance. She never marries, never allows a man to claim her crown by marriage. She flirts with foreign princes, strings along ambassadors, drops vague hints, and then drifts away like mist. They call her the Virgin Queen. You know better. It's not about virginity. It's about autonomy. Because once upon a time her mother gave her heart to a king and lost her head. Elizabeth never forgets. Instead, she builds a throne that cannot be shared. Still, the court is full of tension. Every year that Elizabeth remains unwed, the pressure increases. Parliament urges her to secure the succession. Advisers worry. Nobles gossip. Foreign powers tremble or circle like hawks. and always she smiles. "I have already joined myself in marriage to a husband, namely the Kingdom of England." You hear that speech, you remember it. The way she delivered it, clear, loud, with no room for rebuttal. And the people? They cheered. Not just because it was convenient, but because they believed it. Because she made them. Her reign is long, nearly 45 years. During that time she fends off invasions, outlives every major rival, survives assassination plots, navigates the bloody echoes of the Reformation, and defeats the Spanish Armada. Yes, that Armada. You're standing near her on that stormy day in 1588, when she rides out to address the troops at Tilbury, armour over her gown, wind curling through her hair like fire. "I know I have the body of a weak, feeble woman," she says, "but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and of a king of England too." It's not just words, it's a spell, a line drawn in history's ledger with ink so thick it seeps into the margins of every record that follows. You wonder, quietly, what Anne would have said. Elizabeth never speaks her mother's name in public, but in private the traces are undeniable. She promotes the Boleyn family, keeps Anne's relatives close, protects the Reformed Church her mother helped Henry flirt with. Under Elizabeth, Protestantism becomes not just policy, but identity. You know this is legacy, not coincidence. Anne's ambition, sharpened by Elizabeth's caution. Anne's wit, housed in Elizabeth's diplomacy. Anne's downfall, fueling Elizabeth's refusal to fall. There's a story, small, fringe, rarely told, that Elizabeth once had Anne's initials embroidered into a handkerchief she carried in her sleeve. Another tale claims that Elizabeth kept one of Anne's books, her illuminated prayer book, close at all times, a relic of touch, of memory. Historians still argue whether these accounts are real, romanticised, or political myth-making. But you believe them. Because no woman survives this world without carrying pieces of the ones who didn't. And Elizabeth? She carries Anne like flint. Elizabeth's court becomes the envy of Europe. The Elizabethan age is named for her, an era of exploration, drama, cultural bloom. Shakespeare writes plays that echo from the globe to the future. Raleigh sails toward the edge of the world. The Queen becomes something between myth and monarch. But in the quieter moments, late at night in her writing room, you see her alone, the crown heavy on the table, the mirror turned away. You sit with her in silence. She doesn't need words. Not now. She knows. She always knew. Anne never saw her daughter rise, never saw her rule. But Elizabeth ruled in her name, even when she didn't say it. That was Anne's revenge. Not blood, not fire, not even truth, but survival. Anne's enemies wrote her off as a flirt, a witch, a cautionary tale. Elizabeth rewrote her as prophecy. You rise from the edge of the Queen's chamber as another day closes over a reign that rewrote the map, and tomorrow she'll rule again. The years wear on, and still Elizabeth stands. Older now, yes, but not diminished. If anything, the passing decades have refined her into something more potent. A living symbol, the Virgin Queen, Gloriana. Astria returned, and yet, beneath the gold-dusted portraits, beneath the Latin-laced proclamations, beneath even the thick white lead makeup hiding every wrinkle and weariness, you know what's still there. Anne. She's not a spectre anymore. She's something larger, a myth inside a myth. And by now you've begun to notice. Others are starting to notice too. You pass a group of court poets one morning. They speak in careful metaphor, but the subtext is clear. The Queen, they murmur, has her mother's fire. And though they never say Anne's name, the reverence is there. Anne has been rewritten, not as a harlot, not as a traitor, but as a tragic heroine, the mother of England's saviour. Funny how time does that. You begin to see her image returning, quietly at first, a painting here, a mention there. The tone different now, softer, nobler. You overhear someone call her La Reine injustement perdue, the unjustly lost queen. Anne's story is changing, or rather being reclaimed, by playwrights, by foreign ambassadors, by Elizabeth's own courtiers, who realise that linking their queen to her mother isn't dangerous anymore, it's fashionable. The first wave of rehabilitations begins, and you're there to witness it. Poems casting Anne as misunderstood, sermons that praise her piety, even speculative histories, scribbled in margins and whispered at court, that argue she was innocent all along. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth encouraged this new narrative, or whether it emerged organically from a court desperate to anchor their queen in legend. But you see it. In her silence, in her gaze when Anne's name drifts through the air. She doesn't stop it. Because now Anne Boleyn isn't just her mother. She's her origin story, and the world is finally catching up. It's not just poets either. Painters begin to experiment, reimagining Anne as regal, composed, haloed in golden light. No more demon's sixth finger, no more seductress smirks. Now she's a queen in every frame. The public, long conditioned to fear Anne's ambition, is beginning to admire it, even emulate it. You stand in a bookshop in London as a young girl thumbs through a printed pamphlet, one that speaks of Queen Anne the Martyr of Truth. She doesn't understand all the words, but she traces the portrait with her finger. Legacy, you realise, is not about truth. It's about what survives. And Anne's story is surviving, thriving even. Of course, not everyone agrees. You overhear Catholic visitors to court still calling her names. Whore, heretic, Frenchified serpent. The old slanders live on in certain corners, but they feel brittle now, like paper pressed too thin. No longer dominant, just lingering. And in the background, Elizabeth continues to rule. She deflects marriage proposals, cracks political jokes sharper than swords, writes with such wit that foreign rulers reread her letters twice to catch the insults. She balances Protestant and Catholic factions like a tightrope walker with no net, all while wearing pearls. There's a strange irony in it. Anne was punished for having too much influence. Elizabeth is worshipped for wielding it masterfully. Where her mother's intellect was threatening, hers is divine. Where her mother's passion was suspect, hers is strategy. Where Anne was called a witch, Elizabeth is called wise beyond man. It's the same power, only reframed. And that is the greatest revenge of all. You wander one afternoon through a private study. On the table, a book of letters. One of them is from Elizabeth, written in her own hand, to a noblewoman who lost her mother. Time may cover wounds with dust, but memory wipes away the dust with every breath. You don't need to ask who she was thinking of. Years pass. The myth of Anne Boleyn grows, but so does the empire her daughter built. England rises, trade expands, the arts flourish, new worlds are charted. The Queen's face appears on coins, maps, tapestries, even ship banners. Anne, once erased, now rides the sails of history. There's a popular ballad in the countryside, anonymous of course, that tells the tale of a maiden bold who rose too high, yet bore a child to touch the sky. It ends with the refrain, "And though she walked the tower green, her daughter wears the golden crown unseen." You hear it hummed by market women, whistled by sailors, etched into the back of a tavern door. Anne Boleyn has become folklore, and not the cautionary kind. You remember what Anne once said, pacing her chamber before her arrest. "If I am to be remembered, let it not be for how I fell, but for what I gave." Elizabeth has given her that, a rewritten legacy, a daughter turned legend. And though no monument stands above Anne's grave, you understand now, it was never needed. Her monument walks, reigns, speaks in riddles and rules in reason. Anne Boleyn, once torn down by scandal, now rises in every story that dares to say, maybe ambition isn't a sin. It's near the end now. The throne room is quieter. The fire in the hearth, once loud and alive with ambition, crackles more gently, as if it too is settling into the rhythm of age. Elizabeth sits, a little slower to rise, a little more silver at the temples beneath her powdered wig. The crown is still hers, but the weight is different. You're still with her, watching as the long arc of her reign begins to draw its final curve. And you realise, this is not a story of how Anne Boleyn died. It's the story of how she lasted. Elizabeth has ruled longer than anyone ever expected. She's survived court plots, foreign threats, religious wars, endless suitors. She's outlived those who tried to manage her and the men who thought they could define her. She is, by every measure, the queen who should not have been. And yet, here she sits. The court is older now too. Those who remember Anne are few. But they still whisper, still point out the tilt of Elizabeth's chin, the flick of her wrist, the quiet way she watches before she speaks. So like her mother, they say, you visit the chapel in the tower, again, this time with a courtier who's never seen it. He looks at the stone floor, the simple marker. "This is where she lies?" he asks, almost in disbelief. No marble, no grandeur, just a quiet slab etched faintly, Queen Anne Boleyn, and you nod. Because that's where the story begins, and where it never truly ends. Elizabeth never moves the body, never builds the grand tomb. She lets the stone stay as it is, small, cold, silent. But the monuments? They're elsewhere, in every law passed to protect a Protestant crown, in every school opened in a girl's name, in every book Elizabeth read, and every speech she delivered that echoed Anne's bite. The world begins to write new stories. Playwrights depict Anne not as a villain, but as a wronged queen. Chroniclers shift from condemnation to fascination. Even the clergy grow quiet on old accusations. It's no longer dangerous to admire her. In fact, it's fashionable. Anne Boleyn, the woman who once had no grave, now has libraries. You walk with Elizabeth through the palace garden one last time. She doesn't speak often these days. Her voice has grown thinner, her hands more veined, but when she turns to the sky and sees a falcon, soaring high and golden against the clouds, she smiles. Anne's crest was a falcon. You remember that. The wind stirs the Queen's gown, the same way it stirred Anne's on that scaffold morning. The difference now is everything. Elizabeth outlasts all the men who tried to shrink her. She dies in her sleep, alone, in 1603. Unmarried, unclaimed, unbroken. And with her death the Tudor line ends. But not the story. Because this tale, the one you followed, beat by beat from Anne's laughter in a Kent garden to Elizabeth's final breath, was never just about tragedy. It was about survival, about ambition, about rewriting fate with silk and ink and fire. You return to the tower one last time, you kneel at the marker, and this time you say her name aloud. Anne Boleyn, wife, mother, queen, revolution. She didn't win the throne, but her daughter ruled it for 44 years, and sometimes that's the greater victory. Word count 1294. Wind down, final 300 words. The story's over now. You're still lying there, soft beneath your blankets, the room dim, the hum of a fan or the hush of distant night air curling around your ears. The court has gone quiet. The music, the gossip, the sharp-edged ambition, it all settles now like dust on polished stone. Breathe in slowly. Let it go. You've walked through gardens and galleries, past kings and ghosts. You've seen towers rise and thrones crumble, all through the eyes of a girl from Kent who dared to dream dangerously. Anne Boleyn wasn't perfect, but she was real, sharp, flawed, unforgettable. And her story, it didn't end with a sword. It endured, through a daughter who watched, learned, ruled. You might be wondering what it all means, what to take with you as sleep drifts closer. Maybe it's this, that what's remembered matters more than what's written. That legacy is crafted not by how we fall, but by who rises after us. That sometimes just being seen, fully, fiercely, is enough to change the course of history. So, close your eyes. Let the torches burn out. Let the castle fade. You're not in the tower anymore. You're not in court. You're exactly where you need to be. Warm, safe, floating between centuries, stories and stars. Sleep well now, sweet traveller. Anne's story is quiet. But you remember it. 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 You remember